Close your eyes for a moment and trade the clean lines of modern maps for the uncertain edges of a 6th century world. Britain is no single kingdom yet, only a patchwork of hill forts, half-ruined Roman towns, wet valleys, and long roads that still remember an empire. In that world, you are not a statue in a museum. You are a person who sweats in a mail shirt, who counts oats for a horse, who learns the weight of a shield on a rainy day, and who discovers that glory is mostly mud, hunger, and hard choices. This is the story of how you rise from a small western village to a seat at Arthur's Round Table, not as a flawless legend, but as a witness. You will walk the old Roman roads into Camelot, where politics is as sharp as any sword. You will ride against Saxon war bands along river estuaries, guard passes where mist hides ambushes, and climb a chalk ridge that later generations will argue about for centuries. And in the end, you will learn the hardest lesson of all. The greatest threat to a fragile kingdom is not only the enemy at the border, but the distrust inside the hall. If you are ready, step into your own boots. Let the past breathe. For the next 4 parts, the story speaks to you directly, because for a little while, you are there. Before we begin, if you enjoy immersive historical storytelling like this, subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps these stories reach more people, and it tells me to keep making the next chapter with you. Part: The village at the edge of the old road. You are born where the western rain has room to roam. Your village is not on any grand map. It clings to a low ridge above a wide, peaty valley, a day's walk from the sea, and half a day from the nearest Roman road. The elders still call that road the Straight Stone Way, because it runs like a cut across the land, raised, drained, and stubborn, while everything around it sinks into hedges, bog, and sheep pasture. You grow up among leftovers. A broken milestone lies in the nettles, its Latin letters softened by moss. In the nearest market hamlet, a roofless Roman bathhouse sits like a dead whale. Arches open to the weather, bricks stolen one by one for newer walls. People will tell you the empire left because it ran out of men, or because God willed it, or because Britain was too far and too wet to keep. All you know is that the stonework still stands, and your own timber hall needs constant patching. In spring, the valley smells of wet earth and crushed nettle. The men turn soil with heavy wooden plows tipped in iron, pulled by oxen that breathe steam in the morning. The women and children scatter seed, barley, oats, a little rye where the ground tolerates it, and they keep one eye on the sky, because a week of hard rain can flatten a crop, and a week of sun can harden the clods like baked clay. You learn early that food is not a given. It is a negotiation with weather. Your father is a smith, not the romantic kind, with endless steel, but a practical man with a small charcoal hearth, bellows patched with leather, and the patience to rework old metal into new purpose. Iron is precious because it is heavy to haul and difficult to make. Much of what he shapes begins its life as salvage: a broken Roman nail, a snapped hinge, a worn-out blade traded from a traveler. He teaches you to judge metal by sound. Dull means brittle, bright means tough, and to respect the slow craft of making usefulness from scarcity. He also teaches you the quiet politics of metal. A good nail keeps a roof on in winter, a strong hinge keeps a storehouse closed, and a sharp edge on a sickle can mean the difference between a full granary and an empty one. The village is Christian by the priest's calendar and older by its instincts. On feast days, You hear Latin prayers you do not understand, spoken beside a simple wooden cross. But when a child is sick, someone still hangs rowan branches at the doorway, and when storms roll in, from the sea, the old women mutter charms that sound like a language under your language. You learn to keep your opinions quiet. In a small place, belief is less about arguing and more about keeping peace. War is not a distant tale. Even in the West, the fear of raids travels faster than merchants. People speak of Saxon bands on the eastern rivers, of burnt farms, of captives taken along the coast. You grow up with that constant hum of caution. The village keeps a ditch and a timber palisade around the central yard, more to buy time than to stop an army. Night watches are rotated, and when strangers come, they are met at spear length until someone recognizes a face or a dialect. Your first weapon is not a sword. It is a spear, ash wood, leaf-shaped iron head, balanced to thrust and to throw. In your world, spears win fights because they are cheap, quick to make, and deadly in a line. Your shield is round, planked, with a central iron boss. It smells of resin and smoke. You practice behind the barns, learning how to hide your body behind that circle, how to angle it so blows glance off instead of biting deep. You learn to move as part of a small wall, shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, because a lone fighter is a story, but a shield wall is survival. When you're about 16, a messenger arrives with mud on his calves and a waxed tablet wrapped in cloth. He comes from the local lord who holds the hill fort 2 ridges north. The summons is simple: able-bodied men with spear and shield to muster at the fort before the next new moon. A Saxon war band has been seen far upriver, and the Lord wants eyes and steel on the roads. This is how armies begin in your time, not with uniforms, but with families arguing over who can be spared from the fields. You walk to the hill fort with your father and a dozen others, carrying bundles of food, spare sandals, and whatever iron can be used as a tool or weapon. The fort itself is older than memory. Rings of earth, banks, and timber rebuilt again and again. Inside, there is the smell of animals, smoke, and old fear. Men from other valleys arrive, each group with its own leader, each leader watching the others with the careful stare of someone counting allies and rivals. Training is not elegant. It is repetition under supervision. You learn to keep your spear point steady even when your arms shake. You learn that fatigue makes cowards of clever men. You learn to listen for horns and to obey signals. 2 blasts to form the shield wall, 1 long note to fall back, frantic short notes to warn of flanking. At night, you sleep under a cloak, and the ground pulls cold into your bones. The first time you see real violence, it is brief and confusing. Scouts bring word that the Saxons are not marching in a grand host, but moving in small groups, probing, stealing, testing defenses. Your band tracks them through wet woodland where the trees drink the light. You find a farmstead with smoke still rising from the roof beams. There are footprints in the mud, a broken pot, a child's shoe, and the quiet that comes after shouting has ended. You do not find the raiders. What you find is what they leave behind: ash, splintered doors, and the sick feeling that the world can be changed in the length of a single afternoon. That night, sitting by a low fire that barely dares to burn, you understand something important. Courage is not a bright flame that arrives when you want it. It is a habit you build because the alternative is watching your world be taken piece by piece. And somewhere beyond your valley, you begin to hear a name spoken with a different kind of certainty. Arthur. Not a king in a golden hall, but a war leader who can gather men from many lands and make them move as one. You do not know it yet, but the straight stone road that passes near your village is about to become your lifeline. It will lead you out of the rain-soaked west and into the heart of a fragile, contested Britain, where the Round Table is not just a symbol, but a strategy for holding people together when everything else wants to break apart. Part of Turku, the road to Camelot. The next muster is larger. Word spreads that Arthur is calling for men who can hold a line and keep discipline. Men who can be trusted not to break when the first screams begin. Your lord sends a small contingent to join the levy, partly out of duty and partly out of fear of being left alone if the eastern frontier collapses. You go with them, not because you are hungry for romance, but because staying behind now feels like waiting to be cornered. Travel teaches you what stories cannot. You learn how big Britain is when measured in blisters. You follow the Roman road south, then east, then north again, as commanders redirect the flow of men like water around obstacles. The road is a physical memory of empire. Straight stretches raised above marsh, stones set tight under your feet, mile by mile. Yet it is also cracked and patched, stolen from at the edges and swallowed by weeds where maintenance stopped decades ago. You pass through landscapes that feel like different countries. In the lowlands, fields spread out in quilt patterns, small enclosures, hedges, thin cattle. In the chalk country, the ground turns pale and dry, and the wind cuts across open downs with no mercy. In the Weald, forests close in, and you smell leaf mold and saw resin. Every region has its dialect, its saints, its grudges. You begin to understand why unity is hard. It is not that people hate each other. It is that they have survived by minding their own fences. As you approach the heartland of Arthur's influence, you start seeing evidence of organization. Messenger riders appear more often, with fresh horses waiting at certain halls. Watches are posted at river fords. Grain stores are counted. A war leader's real power is not only in battle, it is in making sure men arrive at battle-fed, shod, and armed. The wealthy bring mail and swords, the poor bring spears and determination. Arthur needs all of it. You first see Arthur's camp near a river bend where an old Roman bridge still stands, half repaired with timber. The camp is not a city of tents like an emperor's, but it is disciplined. Fires are set in rows. Horses are kept downwind. Guards rotate with a rhythm that tells you someone has made rules and expects them followed. There are banners too, cloth dyed with simple symbols, not yet the later heraldry of bright lions and dragons, but enough to identify who answers to whom. Arthur is there, but you do not meet him at first. You meet his system. A stern quartermaster checks your lord's message and counts the number of spearheads. A priest records names on a parchment that looks as valuable as a sword. A veteran with scars like white rivers on his forearms inspects your shield and shows you how to bind the rim with rawhide so it will not split. Nobody flatters you. Nobody cares about your origin story. They care whether you can stand. The first weeks are drill and patrol. You learn to march in column without turning the road into chaos. You learn to make camp quickly, dig latrines down slope, and keep water sources clean because sickness can kill more surely than Saxon steel. You learn that horses are treated like treasure, groomed, fed first, their hooves inspected daily. Cavalry is not just speed, it is a scarce resource in a broken economy. Then, one evening, you are ordered to a hall that locals call Camelot. It is not a magical castle on a cliff. It is a fortified royal site, earth banks, timber walls, a gatehouse rebuilt from older stone. Inside is a great hall with smoke-blackened rafters and hanging shields. The floor is strewn with rushes, but it is cleaner than most places because a king's reputation lives in details. You smell roast meat, beeswax, and wet wool drying near the hearth. When the round table is revealed to you, the first thing you notice is how practical it is. A round table prevents the obvious question of who sits above whom. In a world of proud lords and sensitive honor, that design is a tool. It turns jealousy into a smaller problem, one that can be managed with glances and jokes rather than bloodshed. Seats are assigned, but the shape denies the spectacle of hierarchy. Your invitation is not given like a fairy blessing, it is offered after observation. You held your place in a skirmish. You kept your men together when others scattered. You returned with accurate reports instead of exaggerated glory. Arthur values that. So does his council. A seat at the table for you is an agreement. You will bring truth, not theater. You finally meet Arthur at close range. He is younger than the oldest men want him to be and more tired than the songs admit. His eyes track a room the way a hunter tracks a forest edge, always measuring. He speaks plainly. He asks you where you were born, what crops your people grow, how many days it takes to ride from your valley to the nearest ford. These are not polite questions. They are logistical questions. He is mapping his kingdom in his head, one honest answer at a time. Around him are knights whose names will become heavy with legend. Gawain, quick to smile but quicker to stand. Kay, blunt and sharp-tongued, managing household discipline like a second battlefield. Lancelot, not yet a tragedy, but a man with the calm confidence of someone who has survived too much to brag about it. They look at you the way experienced men look at a new tool, testing, not dismissing. After the meal, the table becomes a chart of Britain. Men mark routes with knife points and spilled ale. Someone speaks of the old forts along Hadrian's Wall where Pictish raiders test the north. Another argues about the Saxon shore and the estuaries where longboats can hide. You listen, and for the first time, you see the island as a whole, not as a valley. That night, as you sit at the round table, for the first time, you realize Camelot is less a place than a method. It is a network of roads, oaths, supply lines, and shared danger. The table is the visible symbol of an invisible thing, coordination. And you, a village-born spearman turned warband officer, have been pulled into the center of that coordination. Your life will no longer be measured by seasons alone, but by campaigns, treaties, and the distance between one river crossing and the next. Part the third. The campaigns of mud and stone. Once you sit at the round table, you discover that knighthood is mostly travel. The work is not a single grand battle, but a chain of smaller decisions. Which ford to hold, which village to evacuate, which grain store to protect, which lord to flatter, so he sends men on time. Arthur's Britain is stitched together by movement, and the thread is always under strain. Your first major assignment is along the eastern waterways, where flatland makes invasion easy. Rivers here are highways. The Thames and its tributaries pull commerce inland, but they can also pull raiders. Saxon war bands favor estuaries and marsh edges, places where a ship can vanish behind reeds and where heavy cavalry cannot pursue. You learn to read water like terrain. the color that signals deep channels, the banks that crumble, the narrow points where a shield wall can block a crossing. You ride with a mixed force. There are mounted men in mail, wealthy, well-fed, their horses compact and tough rather than huge. There are infantry in leather and wool, carrying spears and short blades, their feet wrapped in rags when sandals fail. There are a few archers, not the later longbowmen of legend, but hunters with yew bows who can put an arrow into a man at close range if the light is right. Coordination matters more than equipment. In the field, you come to respect the unglamorous arts. Scouting is everything, so is building. A day of labor can turn a hill spur into a defensible camp. Ditches dug, earth piled, sharpened stakes set. When you have time, you repair what Rome left, reopening a collapsed culvert so a road drains, shoring up a bridge pier with timber. It is not nostalgia, it is survival. If supplies cannot move, armies cannot move, and if armies cannot move, the frontier breaks. The first serious fight you survive happens near a ford at dawn. Mist lies in sheets over the water. Your scouts have reported movement in the night. Oars muffled, a boat pulled into the reeds. Arthur's orders are simple. Do not charge into marsh. Do not scatter. Hold the ford. So you set your men on firm ground where the bank rises, shields locked, spear points angled low. You feel the vibration through the wood as bodies press together, and you hear the wet clicking of iron as spearheads find their place. The Saxons come in a rush. Short shields, axes, blades. They want to break you quickly because their strength is speed and shock. The first impact is not a clean clash, it is a crush. Your shield edge bites into a neighbor's shield, your shoulder grinds against his, and the air fills with breath, sweat, and the sour smell of fear. You thrust without seeing faces, only gaps. You learn the truth of shield wall fighting. You do not duel, you grind. When the line holds, Arthur commits cavalry to the flank where the ground is firm. The mounted men do not perform heroic single combats. They ride into the side of the raiders like a hammer into a wedge, disrupting cohesion. Once the Saxons lose their rhythm, they begin to peel away, trying to reach their boats. Your men do not chase deep into reeds. Instead, you push forward just enough to deny retreat, forcing them into the open where arrows and spears can reach. The fight lasts less than an hour. The aftermath lasts all day. After battle, documentary reality returns. You inventory the dead and wounded. You strip weapons not as trophy, but as necessity. Metal is too valuable to waste. You assign men to watch the wounded. For fever, you bury bodies quickly if you can, and if you cannot, you burn them with respect, because corpses in summer breed sickness. You send messengers with precise numbers, because the round table runs on information. Between campaigns, you ride to negotiate. Arthur's court is not only warriors, it is clerics who write letters, interpreters who bridge dialects, and envoys who carry gifts, salt, cloth, fine knives. You visit petty kings in timber halls and half-ruined villas, sitting on benches while they weigh their pride against their fear. You learn that some men resist Arthur not because they love the Saxons, but because they do not want to be ruled. Arthur's genius is that he does not insist on one identity. He insists on one direction: resist, coordinate, endure. The campaign that becomes the anchor of later songs begins with a march inland toward higher ground. Saxon forces have gathered in numbers large enough to threaten more than a village. They mean to carve territory. Arthur chooses a position where terrain negates their advantages, a slope that narrows approach, with rocky outcrops that limit flanking. Chroniclers will later argue about the exact place. Some will call it a hill, some a mount. You only remember the chalk dust on your tongue and the way the wind stole heat from your sweat. On the day of that battle, you understand strategy as geography. Below you lies flatter land where enemy numbers could spread like a flood. Above you, the ridge constrains movement and turns combat into a test of discipline. Arthur's line forms early, shields overlapping, spears braced. Behind, supply wagons are parked with oxen tethered and water carriers are assigned. Nobody expects the fight to be short. The sun climbs, sweat darkens wool, time stretches till it snaps. When the Saxons advance, they come in waves. Your arms ache from holding shield and spear. Your throat burns from shouting commands. Men slip on loose stone and are trampled. You watch. Veterans rotate positions. Front men dropping back for a breath, fresh men stepping in, because staying static means dying. Arthur moves along the line, not with a banner for display, but with a bodyguard keeping him alive so his voice can keep order. That is leadership in a shield wall, presence that prevents panic. Hours later, when the enemy finally falters, it is not because you performed a single glorious act. It is because their momentum broke against preparation. The victory feels less like joy and more like relief, so deep it is almost emptiness. You look down at the slope and see abandoned shields, dropped axes, blood mixed with chalk into pink mud. You think of your valley, of barley and rain, and you realize you have fought not for conquest, but for the right to keep being who you already were. That night, at the fires, the round table's meaning shifts for you. It is no longer just a clever piece of furniture. It is the circle that kept men from turning on each other. While an enemy pressed at every border, you have seen how quickly a line collapses when pride outweighs discipline. You have also seen how fragile victory is. One season of famine, one feud between lords, one epidemic, and the world could slide backward again. The work will continue, and so will you, because now you know what happens when you stop. Part Yaor, the last winter of a king. A kingdom held together by campaign seasons is always one bad season away from unraveling. You learn that after years of victories. The border holds, the Saxon raids become less confident, and some valleys begin to plant again without posting a guard at every field. People start to believe peace is a new normal. That is when the next danger grows. Not an external enemy, but the slow return of old rivalries. At Camelot, the round table meetings changed tone. In early years, the questions were immediate. Where are the raiders? Which ford is threatened? How many sacks of grain can we move before the rains? Now, the debates become political. Who controls which toll bridge? Whose son will marry whose daughter? Which monastery will receive land? Which lord feels slighted? You are reminded that symbolism matters because men will kill over insults when they are no longer too busy surviving. Through all of it, Arthur ages. The songs will pretend that kings do not tire, but you watch him carry fatigue like a cloak. He eats less, listens more, and speaks with the careful economy of a man who knows his decisions echo. He begins to rely more heavily on a smaller circle of advisors, and that creates jealousy. Some call it prudence. Others call it favoritism. In the shadow of every long reign is the question of succession, and in your world, the answer is often blood. Rumors come first, as they always do. a quarrel between great knights that becomes too loud to ignore, a personal betrayal that turns into a political fracture. You do not need the details to understand the physics of it. Once trust breaks at the top, it spreads like rot through timber. Oaths that once felt sacred begin to sound negotiable. Men ask what they gain rather than what they owe. When Mordred rises as a rival, it is not with a demonic mask, but with paperwork and alliances. He speaks the language of grievance. He tells minor lords that Arthur's wars have exhausted them. He promises stability. He promises that the old ways of local power will return. To some, he is a liberator. To you, he is a risk, because he turns a unified defense into competing camps. If the Saxons are a hammer from outside, civil war is fire from within. The final campaign feels different from the start. The musters are tense. Men arrive with their own banners held too close, their eyes scanning the crowd for friends and enemies. Supplies are harder to gather because merchants fear not a raid, but confiscation by whichever side claims authority. Even the weather seems to lean against you. Low gray skies, roads slick with winter, mud, rivers swollen and impatient. You march toward the place where the conflict will be decided, a battlefield chosen not by poetry, but by inevitability. A corridor of land between water and higher ground where armies cannot easily avoid each other. The ground is pocked and uneven, the kind that breaks formations. You can smell salt in the air if the wind turns, and you can hear gulls in different witnesses. On the morning of battle, you tighten your belt and check the straps on your shield, as if those small actions can create order in a collapsing world. Arthur rides the line. He does not give a grand speech. He simply reminds men of what they have already endured together. He reminds them that a divided Britain will not survive long. His words are a final attempt to turn memory into discipline. The clash is brutal and personal in a way border fights never were. There is no clean us versus them. On the other side are men you have shared bread with, men whose sons once trained beside yours. When the shield walls meet, you feel the impact travel up your bones. You fight because stopping would mean being crushed, but each strike feels like it lands in a familiar house. Hours pass in fragments, a horn call, a scream, the metallic taste of blood in your mouth. The moment you realize your left arm is numb from holding your shield too long, you see Arthur push toward Mordred in the chaos, guarded by desperate loyalty. You see Mordred's men close in, not as villains, but as soldiers who believe their cause is justified. In that swirl, legend is born from confusion. When it ends the way fires end, not with a single snap, but with a slow surrender of light. The field is littered with broken shields and bodies that the cold will preserve before it rots. You find yourself sitting in the mud, unable to remember exactly when the decisive moment happened. You only know the result. Arthur is mortally wounded. Mordred is dead or dying. The victory, if you can call it that, costs the future. You help carry Arthur away from the field. There is no triumphal march. There is only the practical urgency of keeping a king alive long enough to keep the kingdom from shattering completely. In the days that follow, you move through familiar roads that now feel like corridors in a tomb. People watch from doorways, silent. They do not cheer. They count who is missing. The end of Arthur's story is spoken in different ways, depending on who tells it. Some will insist he was taken to a hidden isle to heal. Some will swear he died like any other man. What you know is simpler. You watched the light in his eyes dim, and you felt a chapter of Britain close. You sit at the round table one last time, and the circle feels like a wound. Without Arthur, it is harder to keep the seats equal. Old hierarchies begin to reassert themselves like weeds through cracked stone. Eventually, you ride back to your valley. The Roman road is still there, as stubborn as ever. The milestone still lies in nettles. The roofless bathhouse still waits for another century of rain. Your village has changed in your absence. New children, new graves, a slightly taller palisade. Your father's forge is quieter, his hair grayer. You stand in the doorway and feel, for a moment, like a ghost returning to a life that kept going without you. And yet, you bring something home. Not treasure, not a magical sword. You bring knowledge, how to organize watches, how to store grain against famine, how to read terrain, how to keep men from turning on each other when fear rises. You teach young fighters to hold a line, but also to dig ditches and repair bridges, because peace is built the same way war is, by work. Years later, when someone in the village asks what Camelot was really like, you do not start with legend. You tell them about roads and rivers, about wet boots and ration counts, about the round table as a practical answer to dangerous pride. And when they ask, what Arthur was like, you tell them the truest thing you know. He was a man who understood that unity is not a gift. It is a decision you must make every day, even when it hurts. That is what you saw. And if the world feels like it is breaking into smaller, angrier pieces, remember this: the circle is not a myth, it is a method. You can build it again where you are. If you stayed with me to the end, thank you. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now and leave a like so I know you want more journeys like this, more roads, more battles, more forgotten corners of history brought back to life. Until the next story, travel safely.